we're going to be reading Leibniz's Monadology. I won't do too much of an intro. A lot of people take this to kind of be an exposition of plural idealism. I don't think that is entirely accurate in the sense that Leibniz actually believes like principal plurality. I think really what he's getting at is breaking down the core essence of just particular beings to a unit, but I think that he ultimately derives that unity from God. He is Christian. He will talk about God in this. So let's get started. The monad, of which we shall speak, is nothing but a simple substance which enters into compounds. By simple is meant without parts. And there must be simple substances, since there are compounds. For a compound is nothing but a collection or aggregatum of simple things. Now, where there are no parts, there can be neither extension, nor form, or figure, nor divisibility. These monads are the real atoms of nature, and in a word, the elements of things. No dissolution of these elements need be feared, and there is no conceivable way in which a substance can be destroyed by natural means. For the same reason, there is no conceivable way in which a simple substance can come into being by natural means, since it cannot be formed by the combination of parts. So decomposition cannot destroy something simple. Thus, it may be said that a monad can only come into being or come to an end all at once. That is to say, it can come into being only by creation and come to an end only by annihilation, while that which is compound comes into being or comes to an end by parts. Further, there is no way of explaining how a monad can be altered in quality or internally changed by any other created thing, since it is impossible to change the place of anything in it, or to conceive in it any internal motion which can be produced, directed, increased, or diminished therein, although all this is possible in the case of compounds. Ignore that. In which there are changes among the parts. The monads have no windows through which anything... Let me mute my phone. Totally forgot about that. I intended to do that originally. The monads have no windows through which anything could come in or go out. Accidents cannot separate themselves from substances, nor go about outside of them, as the sensible species of the scholastics used to do. Thus, neither substance nor accident can come into a monad from outside. So the interesting thing about this part is Leibniz kind of talks about how a monad can only change internally, or wait. So, yeah, so he kind of, even though this kind of seems to say signify he's predicating a lack of internal motion, I think what he's actually getting at is that there is no alteration in a monad by anything external to it, which in my view seems to kind of signal that anything that actually affects a monad must in some way be that monad itself, that there's kind of a synergy.
Right.
Yeah, a synergy between any affection, like if one monad apparently affects another, this almost kind of would implicate the reconciliation of like the plural monads into one absolute monad, or the one.
So each monad is grounded in a singular monad.
Yeah,
He did talk about that kind of earlier.
Yeah, I don't think he is, well, he might get at that a little bit, the relationship between monads and God, but he does posit that no monad can actually affect another monad or be changed by something external to it.
But I mean, there you kind of have the idea that nothing is really external to anything. It's all a product of something. So if something is affecting you or affecting your soul or your monad, it's you sort of affecting yourself as
Precisely, yeah.
whatever that thing is rooted in your own self.
Furthermore, the condition that a monad, so I think he will get into this in a little bit. The condition of a monad is kind of that monad entering into composition. I don't know if he'll word it as like any kind of internal
Mm,
composition or participating in composition, but he basically will go into that a little bit. And if you're conditioned, the condition of a monad is kind of its composition, i.e. a compound composed of parts.
mm,
Parts can be affected, and parts also define your relation to other monads, which are conditioned. And when your condition is defined by something that is relative, well, it's easy to see then how affection can take place and how affection is like apparently external, but in actuality internal. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So let's move on from that. The monads must have some qualities, otherwise they would not even be existing things. And if simple substances do not differ in quality, there would be absolutely no means of perceiving any change in things. So this is actually subtly important because it kind of implies that if souls were not like different at all, if they were just copies of the exact same thing, or if you had
Hmm.
two monads of the exact same condition, there would be no differentiation between them. Even if like let's take like identical twins, right? Very, very similar. But
Hmm.
if they had no difference whatsoever, and no qualitative difference in their monads, there'd be no definition that could distinct them to begin with. Um,
Hmm.
so even though monads are simple, they must have some kind of definition, some kind of quality. So souls,
Yeah, yeah.
even though the soul in itself is not conditioned like in a composite way, it
Hmm.
must have some kind of quality. So let's go on from there. And if the simple substances
Well,
did not differ, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it sounds just a quick aside. It sounds a little bit like the monad has is outside of time, is not affected, has no time component,
Right.
and only until it I don't know what the word would be after that. Only until it's manifest does it gain one, and therefore differences can occur. Maybe.
Right. Yeah. I would definitely place time and space both as attributes of manifestation, and manifestation as that of condition or definition in the way
Okay.
I
Yep.
Mm.
model it. So yeah, that would definitely be consistent with that. He might get into more things that can corroborate that. Does anyone else want to comment on that? I do think it's kind of a subtle point, but there's a lot of
There was
implications.
there was one part prior where he was saying that a simple substance cannot be made from combining two things or something like that, which definitely negates when people think of the soul or like a monad as the combination between God and man, resulting in a monad or a soul. Like a lot, it's not super popular, but a lot of people believe in that kind of idea of the soul as a uh, combination of God and man, rather than the sort of gradation from God to soul to man. You know?
Yeah, that would be a very tough point to argue. If I saw that, I would like to see someone put that point forward if they had an argument. But
Yeah.
all right,
It's just
let's.
mostly like Facebook metaphysician
Oh
type
yeah,
people that.
right on. Okay,
It's kind of like we're just the universe experiencing ourselves, man. It's like I was here first, me.
what if God was created? What if we created our own soul?
Oh my god, bro, there's so much of that these days.
Yeah, pretty incoherent stuff. But let's continue on from there
Right.
because I think he will give us a little bit more ammunition actually on this similar vein, and we'll kind of see him
Hmm.
tie things together a little bit as it goes on. And if simple substances did not differ in quality, there would be absolutely no means of perceiving any change in things. For what is in the compound can only come from the simple elements it contains, and the monads, if they had no qualities, would be indistinguishable from one another, since they do not differ in quantity. Consequently, space being a plenum, each part of space would always receive, in any motion, exactly the equivalent of what it already had, and no one state of things would be discernible from another. So basically, in order for any discernible composition, and a composition is that of conditions, right, or definition defined things or qualities, the things that are entering into composition must have some kind of quality. There must be some kind of quality that can permutate into, this composition, this kind of play upon each other. And I think that's probably what monads are kind of like, in a big way. Monads would be like the elemental qualities that, when they kind of have this internal to greater scale monads, which he might get into later, like smaller scale monads, being internal to larger scale monads, kind of being, well, particularizations of the larger scale ones, and kind of engaging in this play with each other that results in those qualities intermingling and, well, probably just resulting in the world and its change and all that. Anyone else have comments on that? That's a good one. All right, there's definitely a lot of good stuff in here, but indeed, each monad must be different from every other, for in nature there are never two beings which are perfectly alike, and in which it is not possible to find an internal difference, or at least a difference founded upon an intrinsic quality. I assume also as admitted that every created being, and consequently the created monad, is subject to change, and further that this change is continuous in each. It follows from what has just been said that the natural changes of the monads come from an internal principle, since an external cause can have no influence upon their inner being. So that relates to earlier. And continuous change is getting at, there's no like gap in the development of definition. It's all, for instance, one moment in your life is consistent with the prior moment, and if you look at your entire life, you now may be very, very different from you 10 years ago, but there's a consistent sequence of moments that led to that change, and you are a monad.
So being sort of affirms becoming.
Right, being.
Or no, the other way around.
Oh, yeah. Becoming does affirm being, because there has to be something becoming. You can't just, becoming without being would be kind of concept reification. What is becoming? You could say what is being, but being is ultimately the kind of the broadest scope at which you could consider anything. It is, it is real.
It's just all of ontic reality.
Yeah, that's a good point. And being does definitely engage in becoming, but not in a way that actually changes what being fundamentally is. Becoming will never change being into something that isn't being, is non-being. So that's a point. That point specifically would be very useful for Neoplatonists to engage the kind of being versus becoming dialectic, because I don't see that from a lot of Neoplatonists. But that, I mean, obviously there is some.
There used to be a lot more, but
yeah. I mean, I see them like talk about like how becoming is like not sufficient.
It's the demiurge, bro.
Yeah. All right. Continuing on at 12. But besides the principle of change, there must be a particular series of changes which constitutes, so to speak, the specific nature and variety of the simple substances. This particular series of changes should involve a multiplicity in the unit, or in that which is simple. For every natural change takes place gradually, something changes and something remains unchanged. And consequently, a simple substance must be affected and related in many ways, although it has no parts. The passing condition, which involves and represents a multiplicity in the unit, or in the simple substance, is nothing but what is called perception. Let's actually read that again. The passing condition, which involves and represents a multiplicity in the unit, or in the simple substance, is nothing but what is called perception, which is to be distinguished from apperception or consciousness, which I'm assuming he's kind of distinguishing that because perceiving something or the object of perception isn't the same as the perceiving agent. And so, for instance, actually, I see pretty frequently the notion that consciousness is the same thing as the object of consciousness, and without the object of consciousness, you actually don't have consciousness. That consciousness is reliant on the object of consciousness. And that actually comes from Ayn Rand.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yes. At
That's
least
crazy.
I'm pretty sure that comes from Ayn Rand. I saw that on Jonathan Rotz's channel. He's a good channel.
Oh, he's friends with Arvel, right?
Yeah, he's had a conversation with
They've
Orville.
made videos together.
Yeah, the Quantum Hermetica video. Yeah, it's pretty. I actually need to finish it though. It's a longer one. But it totally is it's an incoherent point, and it's actually interesting because this kind of seems to address that, quite a while ago. But yeah, consciousness is not the same as the object of consciousness. Even Ken Wheeler's point may be misconstrued, but he refers to consciousness as the consubstantiality of body and soul, which kind of implies, I think he kind of seems to imply that consciousness is reliant on the object of consciousness. You can't have subject-oriented consciousness, but that may be not. I mean, it seems to be implied, and it'd be worthy of engagement, anyways. But it may.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think. I mean, just in terms of the way he describes it, yeah, it's a little bit. It'd be like 1 degree less than how it probably actually is in his description. I mean, like, how would I even? It's hard to find words for this sort of thing, as you know. But for example, your take that essentially, of course, they're all the same. Of course, they are. They're just different. They're not even that really different. They're just almost like different snapshots of the same thing. Where Ken would say, or has implied a little bit, that they are almost separate and they aren't separate. They are separate, as if they. Geez, I have really talking myself in circles on this one. You know what? I'm gonna back myself out. Basically, all I was trying to say is, I feel that in Ken's description, he implies that there is a separation, that, or he implies an implied separation in that. Oh my goodness, I give up.
I do think Ken.
Never mind. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. I think Ken probably does subscribe to some kind of like higher form of consciousness. He does refer to the consubstantial consciousness as either that or the empirical consciousness. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did believe some kind of higher noetic subject-oriented consciousness of sorts. But Ken has a very interesting way of articulating himself. Can be kind of hard to follow, and I think he may obscure what he says a little bit. But yeah, let's go on. It is a interesting point, and we're only on the beginning of page 3, so I don't know exactly how far we'll get, but we'll just play it by ear. I'm not too worried if this ends up being different sessions. In this matter, the Cartesian view is extremely defective, for it treats as non-existent those perceptions of which we are not consciously aware. This has also led them to believe that minds alone are monads, and that there are no souls of animals nor other entelechies. Thus, like the crowd, they have failed to distinguish between a prolonged unconsciousness and absolute death. which has made them fall again into the scholastic prejudice of souls entirely separate from their bodies, and has even confirmed ill-balanced minds in the opinion that souls are mortal. So that's a lot of content in that. Okay, but he's gonna elaborate it. So
Mm.
the activity of the internal principle which produces change or passage from one perception to another may be called appetition, or appetite. It is true that desire cannot always fully attain to the whole perception at which it aims, but it will always obtain some of it and attains to new perceptions. We have in ourselves experience of a multiplicity in simple substance. When we find that the least thought of which we are conscious involves variety in its object, thus, all those who admit that the soul is a simple substance should admit this multiplicity in the monad. And M. Bale, actually I don't know who he's referring to, but he does refer to some other people in this, ought not
Right.
to have found any difficulty in this, as he has done in his dictionary article Rorarius. Moreover, it must be confessed that perception and that which depends upon it are inexplicable on mechanical grounds, that is to say, by means of figures and motions. And supposing there were a machine so constructed as to think, feel, and have perception, it might be conceived as increased in size, while keeping the same proportions, so that one might go into it as into a mill. That being so, we should, on examining its interior, find only parts which work upon one another, and never anything which or by which to explain a perception. Thus, it is in a simple
You
substance.
posted that a while back,
I
right?
did, yes, I did.
Yeah, I remember that.
We'll talk about this in a moment here.
All right, sorry.
No problem. And not in a compound or in a machine. This is a good one. That perception must be sought for. Further, nothing but this, namely perceptions and their changes, can be found in a simple substance. It is also in this alone that all the internal activities of simple substances can consist. So this kind of is alluding to the Leibniz, well, not exactly, but kind of to the Leibniz gap.
Yeah.
That which kind of holds that you can't find something to explain immaterial phenomena such as, well, in this case, perception, but really mind or consciousness, and wherever else it's explicated, presumably theodicy, which you may notice he cites a lot in this, I'm sure. Right, yeah, right there as well. Which is another work of his. Basically, if you were to take the human body, magnify it, I don't know, 100 times, such that you could walk through all of the human organs and whatnot, and kind of see it as a machine, there'd be nothing in itself there that explains, for instance, like an image. You'll never find the image while you're walking through the human body. You'll never find the image. You'll only find things that correspond to perception, or you'll find like mechanisms that facilitate it. You'll find, like, for instance, if someone were to cite, like, I don't know, like synapses and neurons, whatever.
Yeah.
These are not the image in itself. These are things that correspond to it. You never see a thought. You'll never see the image or the object of perception. Well, the perception isn't exactly the object of perception. Well, I guess an idealistic system kind of is, but but that's kind of the point he's getting at here, is that this almost sounds Kantian when he says that perception and the object of perception are inexplicable, but then he goes on to say mechanical grounds. But yeah, very good point. Does anyone have anything to add for that or to that? Highly recommend looking into the Leibniz gap. That's probably going to be something.
So
that's
in
never
theodicy, he
crossed.
goes deeper into that, right?
In some of his works, I'm sure he goes further into the Leibniz gap. I'm sure probably in theodicy, but I know he has more scientific stuff that's less philosophically oriented. Although for him, he probably doesn't have a hard cutoff. where he discusses that. I'm not entirely sure, but probably wouldn't be terribly difficult to find out though, because Leibniz gap's very good point.
It's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Continuing along here, all simple substances or created monads might be called intellices, which I believe means kind of like a ground for composition. Let me, you know what? Let's verify real quick. Supposed vital principle that guides the development and functioning of an organism or other system organization. Okay, yeah, kind of. That's kind of right. Just so we all kind of have a little bit of context there. It's not a commonly used word. For they have in them a certain perfection, they have a certain self-sufficiency, which makes them the sources of their internal activities, and so to speak, incorporeal automata. Right on, okay. If we are to give the name soul to everything which has perceptions and desires, in the general sense which I have explained, then all simple substances or created monads might be called souls. But as feeling is something more than a bare perception, I think it right that the general name of monads or intellices should suffice for simple substances which have perceptions only, and that the name of souls should be given only to those in which perception is more distinct and is accompanied by memory. So perhaps, so he kind of does, sympathize with kind of interchanging these with soul. So if anyone was thinking soul as interchangeable with monad, you're correct. He's doing it kind of to exalt the human soul in a way, is what I'm getting, or maybe not just human, but like animal souls, as opposed to other, like, I'm sure this is kind of
amoebas or something.
Yeah, like very simple souls which don't engage in discursion, memory. Although I would argue that probably any capacity that or faculty that the human soul has probably is present in more simple ones. It is probably just more simple. For instance, memory is kind of just like the recursion of the condition of that monad. It's elasticity, but if there's less discursion, then there's less recursion, if that makes sense. Or maybe not, maybe discursion is the wrong word, but if there's less like going away from the condition in itself, then memory is less, because memory is essentially the elasticity of the condition of a soul, right? It's kind of the assistance to its inertia, so to speak. But I think that's good clarification. I'm okay with the term monad and using soul as exaltation, but I mean personally, I'm also okay with using them interchangeably. All right. For we experience in ourselves a condition in which we remember nothing and have no distinguishable perception, as when we fall into a swoon or when we are overcome with a profound dreamless sleep. In this state, the soul does not have does not perceptibly differ from a bare monad, but as this state is not lasting, the soul comes out of it, and the soul is something more than a bare monad. So this seems to be, actually, I feel like this actually kind of ties into what I just said about discursion, because consciousness is kind of, it's not actually like creating distance to the bare quality or condition of the soul, but it is orienting itself not away from it, but differently than being in itself entirely, which is kind of what's being like total unconsciousness. You can think of, let's use the monad symbol, actually, very fittingly, right, as a tool to discuss this. The focal center, think of the focal center, like the dot in the circle, as consciousness, and the peripheral circle on the perimeter of that point as the total condition, or you think of it as the unconscious or subconscious, whatever. The consciousness would kind of be like when it's unconscious, would kind of be like diffused into the whole of that soul or monad, whereas when it is
Into
concentrated
the center or into the
into the
periphery?
periphery,
Right.
such that it's not like it would be then indistinguishable. It'd almost be like the point is no longer there, or you could say maybe it's only the point, but and then consciousness would be an orientation that when concentrated is not wholly oriented upon itself, but rather you could actually tie that potentially into its entrance into composition, and its orientation thereupon, which would kind of be that discursive orientation away from itself in a way. Although, I'm being cautious in saying that because ultimately I don't think the soul is really engaging in anything that is not itself, but it could engage in conditions that are, well, okay, think of it like this. Definition implies relation, which implies kind of being able to be oriented on conditions which aren't your own, but
Your
are
own.
relative to your own.
So then, what does that go? Like prior to this, he was talking about how monads couldn't affect other monads, right? How does that tie into that then?
It would tie
If
into that because all relation would, in a certain respect, be your own condition, right? Because whatever your condition is, well, that immediately creates a relation, and that relation is also part of that condition. That's how I think that would tie in. I think it would need explication for sure, but it would be something along those lines. So I'm being kind of cautious just to, clarify the idea that I think he's getting at. Well, yeah, let me backtrack this a little bit. I think it kind of relates to the discursion away from the subconscious, so to speak. But when you have that discursion, maybe discursion is the wrong word, orientation away from it, you have, well, that's what creates kind of remembrance, right? That kind of creates
right.
recursion. So we could say procession reversion, I suppose.
Okay, yeah.
All right, let's continue from there. And it does not follow that in this state, simple substance is without any perception. That indeed cannot be, for the reasons already given, for it cannot perish, and it cannot continue to exist without being affected in some way. And this affection is nothing but its perception. And when there is a great multitude of little perceptions, in which there is nothing distinct, one is stunned, as when one turns continuously round in the same way several times in succession. Whence comes a giddiness which may make us swoon, and in which keeps us from distinguishing anything. Death can for a time put animals in this condition. So I don't know, that just kind of reminds me of like indefinition, not being able to, like, perception is kind of that of definition. You're perceiving defined things. If
Right.
you remove that definition, I could see that kind of tying into the swoon or the being stunned. But we'll continue on to see if that kind of is elaborated. And as every present state of a simple substance is naturally a consequence of its preceding state, in such a way that its present is big with its future, and as on waking from stupor we are conscious of our perceptions, we must have had perceptions immediately before we awoke, although we were not at all conscious of them. For one perception can in a natural way come only from another perception, as a motion can in a natural way only come from a motion. So this kind of, in a very interesting way, ties what was said earlier about the consistency of states, as similar to the analogy I gave about, each moment is consistent with its prior moments. He's tying that to perception. And I think I would kind of want his use of consciousness and perception, like differentiation. I kind of think the way, I mean, we do experience consciousness differently while we're dreaming. You could say that you're unconscious while you're dreaming, but in a way you kind of are conscious. You're certainly perceiving and experiencing dreams. So I think, to my view, the biggest difference is this kind of lack, this lack of a kind of metacognizance, or awareness of the nature of your experience, which is almost like just an elevated state of perception. But that's just my thoughts on the matter. You guys have anything to add to that?
No, nothing particularly.
All right. It thus appears that if we had in our perceptions nothing marked and, so to speak, strikingly and highly flavored, we should always be in a state of stupor. And this is the state in which the bare monads are. So this is actually pretty interesting theorizing as to what the existence of more simple souls would be, or more simple monads, like elemental, immaterial natures. Elemental in the sense of like irreducible, or very, very unitary, as I think what he is getting at. Not like, I mean, that's what elemental always means, but sometimes they could just have other connotations.
Right.
We see also that nature has given heightened perceptions to animals from the care she has taken to provide them with organs which collect numerous rays of light or numerous undulations of the air in order, by uniting them, to make them have greater effect. Something similar to this takes place in smell, in taste, and in touch, and perhaps in a number of other senses which are unknown to us. And I will explain presently how that which takes place in the soul represents what happens in the bodily organs. So this is a very excellent point, is the correspondence between the soul and the body. Probably I would argue that Leibniz isn't just positing a correspondence between the soul and body, but like the body as a literal representation of the soul's
image.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Memory provides the soul with a kind of consecutiveness which resembles reason, but which is to be distinguished from it. Thus, we see that when animals have a perception of something which strikes them, and of which they have formerly had a similar perception, they are led, by means of representation in their memory, to expect what was combined with a thing in this previous perception, and they come to have feelings similar to those they had on the former occasion. When a stick is shown to dogs, they remember the pain it has caused them. They howl and run away. his example is immediately
fascinating perspective.
Yeah, it's hey, that's an interesting cultural difference. It's fucking the dogs in Leibniz's time. They see a stick, they don't think that it's gonna be a toy. They think that they're gonna get beaten. All right.
Yeah,
that's pretty funny.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And the strength of the mental image which impresses and moves them comes either from the magnitude or the number of preceding perceptions. For often a strong impression reduces or produces all at once the same effect as a long-formed habit, or as many and oft-repeated ordinary perceptions. I'm going to quickly tie this into
addiction.
Well, my article on inertia, the principle of inertia, because this is basically the soul is plastic, i.e., it is receptive to impression, and it is also elastic. So the impression also, it being plastic, is its condition. Its condition is plastic. It's receptive to impression. The impression changes the condition. That condition is also elastic. I define inertia as applied to the soul as kind of characterized by both plasticity and elasticity. So whatever the condition is, it is also elastic. So you have recursion to that condition. So that's exactly what this is. I think Leibniz would have liked my paper on that. But
definitely.
Yeah, it's actually it's one of my favorite ones. Insofar as I'm gonna do this actually just so if anyone wants to read the previous one, it will be there. Insofar as the concatenation of their perceptions is due to the principle of memory alone, men act like the lower animals, resembling the empirical physicians whose methods are those of mere practice without theory. Indeed, in 3/4 of our actions we are nothing but empirics. For instance, when we expect that there will be daylight tomorrow, we do so empirically, because it has always happened until now. It is only the astronomer who thinks on rational grounds. But it is the knowledge of necessary and eternal truths that distinguishes us from the mere animals and gives us reason and the sciences, raising us to the knowledge of ourselves and of God. And it is this in us that is called the rational soul or mind. So basically knowing not just by the recursion of conditions, but actual discursion.
This kind of ties into the like breakfast thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Like,
but let's
what would you do if you didn't have breakfast this morning?
Yes, but let's not get too much into that. I don't
Right.
But yes, yeah, it is. It is related to that though. It is also through the knowledge of necessary truths and through their abstract expression that we rise to acts of reflection, which makes us to think of what is called I, and observe that this or that is within us, and thus, thinking of ourselves, we think of being, of substance, and of simple and the compound, of the immaterial and of God himself, conceiving that what is limited in us is in him without limits. And these acts of reflection furnish the chief objects of our reasoning. Our reasonings are grounded upon two great principles, that of contradiction, in virtue of which we judge false from that which involves a contradiction, and that which is opposed to contradictory or contradictory to the false, which is actually similar to, well,
dialectics,
yeah,
kind of.
well, similar kind of to what Chris Langan says about tautology, and that of sufficient reason, in virtue of which we hold that there can be no fact real or existing, no statement true, unless there be a sufficient reason why it should be so and not otherwise, although these reasons usually cannot be known to us or by us. So that's the principle of non-contradiction and the principle of sufficient reason. And I think this, what do they call that? Although the reasons usually cannot be known to us, you kind of, that's kind of gets into Gödel's incompleteness, wherein very elemental or elementary things you cannot, when they're logically irreducible, you can't like really discursively explain them, I think is what he's getting at. But let's move on from there. There are also two kinds of truths, those of reasoning and those of fact. Truths of reasoning are necessary, and their opposite is impossible. Truths of fact are contingent, and their opposite is possible. When a truth is necessary, its reason can be found by analysis, resolving it to more simple ideas and truths until we come to those which are primary. It is thus that in mathematics, speculative theorems and practical canons are reduced by analysis to definitions, axioms, and postulates. So I think this coffee cup is on my table. That is a fact that is contingent on my coffee cup not being picked up, which I just did. Is no longer true, is no longer a fact. You being a human, or actually you having a soul, is truth of reason. You being a human is contingent. Who knows what's going to happen? Just kidding. But does anyone have any comments for that? All right. In short, there are simple ideas, of which no definition can be given. There are also axioms and postulates. So yeah, simple ideas. In a word, primary principles which cannot be proved, and indeed have no need of proof, and these are identical propositions which whose opposite involves an express contradiction. So that would be basically tautology. They don't need to be proved because it is necessarily true, because if it weren't, it would imply some kind of inherent contradiction. So the opposite of a contradiction. Okay. But there must also be a sufficient reason for contingent truths or truths of fact. That is to say, for the sequence or connection of the things which are dispersed throughout the universe of created things, in which the analyzing into particular reasons might go on into endless detail, because of the immense variety of things in nature and the infinite division of bodies, there is an infinity of present and past forms and motions which go to make up the efficient cause of my present writing, and there is an infinity of minute tendencies and dispositions of my soul which go to make its final cause. And as all this detail again involves other prior or more detailed contingent things, each of which still needs a similar analysis to yield its reason, we are no further forward, and the sufficient or final reason must be outside of the sequence or series of particular contingent things, however infinite the series may be. Thus, the final reason of things must be in a necessary substance, in which the variety of particular changes exists only eminently, as in its source, and this substance we call God. This seems kind of, well, I might be a little bit off on this, but it seems kind of Aristotelian in a good way. Kind of like an unmoved mover or like an uncaused causer.
Yeah.
So for this reason, I do think the plural idealism idea is very reconcilable with monism.
Well, I mean, especially right there, he's just definitely reconciled it himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't
very
seen
true.
too many people argue for him being like not a monist.
Yeah, people in these circles probably wouldn't, but I see it's just referred to, like if you go onto Wikipedia and you're looking at different kinds of idealism, some forms of monistic idealism will be cited, and Leibniz will not be cited there. He will be cited, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, as not opposed to it, but in juxtaposition with it, in contrast to the monistic idealistic systems with his plural idealism. I don't know if he ever called it that, but I really doubt it. So I think it's definitely an erroneous interpretation of Leibniz in some ways, but let's move on from there. Now, as this substance is a sufficient reason of all this variety of particulars, which are also connected together throughout, there is only one God, and this God is sufficient. So yeah, that's just straight up
there you go.
monism. Basically, all particulars are reconciled in the universal. All particulars are particularizations of that universal, contained in that universal, etc., etc. We may also hold that this supreme substance, which is unique, universal, and necessary, nothing outside of it being independent of it, this substance, which is a pure sequence of possible being, must be illimitable and must contain as much reality as possible. Yeah, I think Langen definitely had a lot from Leibniz. Specifically, he does mention Leibniz.
Definitely.
He does mention him.
Yeah.
He actually mentions him right up there with like Plotinus, and actually probably more than Plotinus and Plato. He might even be like one of the. He's definitely mentioned him a few times. I think even in like the Keith Woods interview, he does mention Leibniz. As one of the people who got close, which is fair, but yeah. So
yeah, this is pretty close, and this is definitely close to Langen's metaphysics.
Yeah, it's just funny that he would put like Leibniz. Oh, he definitely would exalt himself over Leibniz, which may have some fair claims to it. I mean, CTMU is very good, but continuing on, whence it follows that God is absolutely perfect, for perfection is nothing but amount of positive reality in the strict sense, leaving out of account the limits or bounds in which things are limited. And where there are no bounds, as to say, in God, perfection is absolutely infinite. So this is where my definitionalism or auto-definitional idealism would kind of take a bit of a different stance, rectify, where I think this is well, where it's right and where it's not right. God must be illimitable, therefore there could be no principal limit. If God is the reality principle, there could be no principle that contradicts that. So I think definition helps in a lot of ways. But continuing on, it follows also that created beings derive their perfections from the influence of God, but that their imperfections come from their own nature. So yeah, that's where I think there could be some room for mistake, or not, maybe at least not mistake, but rather clarification or rearticulation. Definitely worth
Yeah,
looking
it's
into.
very Christian for sure.
Yeah, I was literally just thinking that.
Yeah, indeed. But that their imperfections come from their own nature, which is incapable of being without limits. In a way, that is true because a quality, all particularity, basically implicates quality or condition, which is kind of a limitation, and it's a relative limitation, literally. But that's where I'd use definition to kind of replace the term entirely to avoid just misconceiving of. This could spiral to a lot of misconceptions in my view, but we'll just continue. For it is in this that they differ from God. But in a general sense, this is correct, though. I don't mean to contradict that. And in this interpretation, like if you were to correctly interpret limits, in a way it is correct, just not the best way of putting things. An instance of this original imperfection of created beings may be seen in the natural inertia of bodies. It is farther true that in God there is not only the source of existences, but also that of essences, insofar as they are real, that is to say, the source of what is real in the possible. For the understanding of God is the region of eternal truths, or of the ideas on which they depend, and without him there would be nothing real and in the possibilities of things, and not only would there be nothing in existence, but nothing would even be possible. For if there is a reality in essences or possibilities, or rather in eternal truths, this reality must needs be founded in something existing and actual, and consequently in the existence of necessary being, in whom existence involves essence, or essence involves existence, or in whom to be possible is to be actual. So that's a good point. Potentially in God, that which is in potentia is essentially indifferent from that which is actual. He is just the whole of reality, and kind of the actual.
So, in reading that, do you think he'd be like a proponent of like multiversalism?
Actually, we'll get
The
there
idea
because
that
I think he does talk. He mentions something in here. I do remember. I don't know if we'll get it this time. I think has been about an hour, and we are looking to be halfway through. I'm thinking maybe split this into two parts. But he will actually talk about that, and we will get there either, if it's soon, or we'll probably do one more page after this.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll just let him get to that. If I remember correctly. And then we'll
just let him cook.
Yeah, we'll let him cook. Thus, God alone, or the necessary being, has this prerogative that he must necessarily exist, if he is possible, and as nothing can interfere with the possibility of that which involves no limits, no negation, and consequently no contradiction, that is, his possibility, is sufficient of itself to make known the existence of God a priori. We have thus proved it through the reality of eternal truths, but a little while ago we proved it also a posteriori, since there exist contingent beings which can have their final or sufficient reason only in the necessary being which has the reason of existence in itself. So this one's going to be a little bit tough to elaborate. Oh, excuse me, voice crack. But he's saying, well, a posteriori is knowledge from experience, a priori, knowledge independent of experience. So I think what it seems like he's saying is that because necessary being, see, this is probably one of the only things in here that I didn't, I read it and I kind of tried to rectify it, but it seems a little bit, I don't know, maybe not extremely good point that God's existence is a priori, because essentially it seems like if he is, let's see, it seems like he's saying that if he, because potential and actual in God is said to be the same thing, if he can potentially exist, he must exist, is kind of what I'm getting from that, but that doesn't seem very good, so I might actually be, is anyone else getting like a different read of this?
I'm kind of getting that. I'm just waiting for more to be explained.
Yeah, let's see if he elaborates that. The a posteriori is a really good point. All right. We must not, however, imagine, as some do, that eternal truths, being dependent on God, are arbitrary and depend on his will, as Descartes and afterwards M. Poiret appear to have held. That is true only of contingent truths, of which the principle is fitness or choice of the best, whereas necessary truths depend solely on his understanding and are its inner object. Thus, God alone is the primary unity or original simple substance, so that's a pretty good point, of which all created or derivative monads are products and have their birth, so to speak, through continual fulgurations of the divinity from moment to moment, limited by the receptivity of the created being, of whose essence it is to have limits, or I would say to be a condition, which is, he kind of does, say that, in order for a monad to be discernible, it has to have quality. So the monads exist by virtue of having a condition. So they are conditions, or you could say maybe conditionalizations, particularizations,
So
instantiations.
would he then be saying that there is a greater condition, that that different souls are more relative to this greater condition than other souls or monads in this way of putting it?
As far as God is concerned, no monad. I don't think he comments on that exactly, but as far as I understand it, no monad would be more relative to God than another if God is absolute and like just necessary being. But if you like maybe henads, which would be kind of the first instantiation of condition, you could certainly have. I would like to hear more on that, but I'd say when it comes to like plural gods or henads or any like other greater scale monads as compared to humans, there could certainly be humans who are more relative to them. They wouldn't be more relative to like the totality of henads, which is similar to the monad, because they kind of just contain the most reality. So it's kind of difficult to like truly deviate. You could have like inversions of some kind, or you could have orientation away from. It's kind of, when I say orientation away, like from God, for instance, you might think, well, if God is all that there is, how could you possibly be non-oriented? Which is a good point, because you really can't. But what you're oriented on, you can reify as something it's not. So, for instance, the most
you could be more object-oriented. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, you could. Well, and even further than that, because object orientation is the most common example. Object orientation is essentially reification of the object as being in itself, which objects are not like fake per se, and they are contained,
but they're not
real.
Principally their own thing.
Right, they're not the real in itself. So if you're, it's kind of basically just a delusion. You can be deluded as to what is what it is, or as to the nature of things, but your orientation is never even really off of the subject in a way. Well, well, definitionally, it kind of is, just not on the subject in itself, on the subject's operation, which is the object. But you could also say that, like, even maybe this would be kind of object orientation, but if you're oriented on like something that's not objective, but it's also like just false, just like a misconceived notion, that would potentially be orientation away from the real in itself.
So a sort of willed ignorance.
Yeah, or I mean, it could just even be ignorance, like not even intentional. If someone was just deluded and it's not necessarily their fault. If you make the argument that there is some kind of primordial agnosis, like Ken Wheeler does, like he maintains the primordial agnosis of the absolute, I think there's a strong argument. In fact, I think I make a stronger argument of that than Ken does.
Yeah, you do.
Much stronger. Then it certainly wouldn't be the fault of monads for being deluded or ignorant, but to remain in that delusion, it would be their fault.
Right.
But moving on from there, let's see. We'll go to line. Actually, real quick. Okay, that's 50. Yeah, this looks about the halfway point. But if there's 52 lines, then
when we're sort of done, there's one thing I kind of wanted to ask.
Okay.
A little bit.
All right, we'll go to
just when we're done with that line.
To 52 or.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go to line 52.
Whenever. Yeah. Okay.
All right. In God there is power, which is the source of all, also knowledge, whose content is the variety of the ideas, and finally will, which makes changes or products according to the principle of the best. Oh, is that a little bit of a echo, or is that just okay?
I don't know what that was.
These characteristics correspond to what in the created monads forms the ground or basis to the faculty of perception and to the faculty of appetition. But in God, these attributes are absolutely infinite or perfect, and in the created monads, or the intellecies, there are only imitations of these attributes, according to the degree of perfection of the monad. A created thing, well, actually, I'll comment on that briefly. It seems to be, I would say, not. I wouldn't posit any degree of perfection, but I would posit that in monads being conditioned, they have different permutations of character or qualities that are necessarily prepossessed by God, or in God in some kind of unconditioned way, but in their conditionalization is they're permutated to different degrees for sure, but different proportions. I'd say that defines the quality itself. That defines the condition. A created thing is said to act outwardly insofar as it has perfection, and to suffer or be passive in relation to another insofar as it is imperfect, which would potentially get into how self-sufficient it is. The less self-sufficient, the more it would have to derive sufficiency from other monads, but I don't want that to go on too much of a tangent, but that's just what I'm kind of getting from him. Whether or not I would fully agree, there's definitely something to it. But this activity is attributed to a monad insofar as it has distinct perceptions and passivity, insofar as its perceptions are confused. And one created thing is more perfect than another, in this, that there is found in the more perfect that which serves to explain a priori what takes place in the less perfect, and it is on this account that the former is said to act upon the latter. But in simple substances, the influence of one monad upon another is only ideal, and it can have its effect only through the mediation of God, insofar as in the ideas of God, any monad rightly claims that God, in regulating the others from the beginning of things, should have regard to it. For since one created monad cannot have any physical influence upon the inner being of another, it is only by this means that one can be dependent upon the other. So I think that would kind of get into the relation we talked about earlier, and also this is a pretty good paragraph because God would almost in this context serve as a relational medium. So when somebody affects their own condition, they affect the condition of reality, or the more universal condition, which in turn affects other particular conditions.
I think Langan has said things similar before.
I think he has as well. I think he has indeed. But yeah, I think he maybe even call that like a syntactic medium is a word that comes to mind. That might be something else though.
Yeah. No, I think you got it right.
I know syntactic medium is a term in the CTMU, but it might be for something else entirely. But yeah, we'll finish this up real quick. Accordingly, among created things, activities and passivities are mutual. For God, comparing two simple substances, finds in each reasons which oblige him to adapt the other to it. And consequently, what is active in certain respects is passive from another point of view. Active insofar as what we distinctly know in it serves to explain what takes place in another, and passive insofar as the explanation of what takes place in it is to be found in that which is distinctly known in another. And you know what? When we start up the next time, I'll probably go ahead and we'll reread this because, as you see, sometimes they do like arrow lines and the ideas go into the next ones, go into the next ones. But that'll be
just remember where it's at.
Yeah, I'll remember. We'll start on line 52, and you said you had something to.
Yeah, I just wanted to. You kind of mentioned henads earlier, or is it heniads? No, henads, right?
Yeah.
How would you sort of relate this monadology to aspective polytheism?
So I would put spectuation as kind of the particularization process, right? It's the creating of aspects of one principle, self-contained aspects by that principle, of course. So henads would essentially be the most universal conditions. They'd be the most universal particulars, if that makes sense. The very first particulars. The very first particulars would contain the most reality, and they would be the least particular things possible while still being somewhat particular. They would have they'd be the foremost conditions, the universal conditions. They would all be kind of, and I believe Leibniz will get into this, how monads are not only self-contained, but just by virtue of the nature of reality, being monistic, unitary, monads kind of contain each other. There's a relation.
Right.
So henads probably to an even more, to an even higher degree, much higher degree, I'm sure, because they have less particularity. So there's less defining the relation, which means that the relation is more intermingled. The more definition, the more distincted the relation between different conditions will be. And in this case, what is the condition? It's a monad, it's a soul. So the more distincted the souls will be from one another. So that's why gods would have a very, very intimate interplay between one another. But yeah, spectuation or polytheistic spectuation, which is one of my favorite neologisms, is essentially just maintaining that the gods are contained by the one. It's a reconciliation of monism and polytheism, which I don't think is very difficult to do. I'm sure we know that a lot of pagans of the past were like this. Maybe not all of them. Probably not all of them.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty good term, and that spectuation just implies that they are the foremost aspects of the reality principle in itself, which cannot be a particular condition. So it cannot be, you could say that one of the gods, for instance, is kind of either a more direct aspect of the one in itself or the Godhead. I'm sure there could be arguments for that. Maybe Jove or Zeus or Odin, or maybe people would say that those gods actually are kind of getting at the one in itself.
Right. I would say the latter. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be like the chief among the gods, right? And I
Yeah.
think even like Varg would say that like all the other gods were supposed to be the aspects of the one sort of
Really.
chief.
If I could,
I think
yeah.
he did kind of imply that in one of his books.
If
I mean,
we
and of
can,
course he doesn't have a metaphysical,
if we
basis
can
for
get
that, but that's
Varg
still something. You know?
talking like inadvertently affirming monism, that'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you guys have anything else any closing
No.
comments?
No.
No one else?
They're all muted.
Oh, they're all.
I don't know if they know they're muted.
Yeah, they can all they can all be unmuted.
Here, let me go through.
I just got here.
Wait, who's that?
Oh, Noverman.
Oh, yeah, we just finished up.
Oh,
my
god
friend.
damn it.
It's okay.
Hi, Meta.
I'm gonna do this.
But that's okay. We will. You guys can pick up. Anyone else who wants to pick up and join us next time. I will leave. We're on paragraph 52. I will put that in the reading club channel. It's very easy to read. As you can see, it's all segmented. That means the pages go by pretty quick. It is loaded with really good ideas though, so definitely don't just skim through it. It's worth reading. But if you guys pick up, or maybe you don't even pick up and you just join in for next time, you probably still get some good insights out of it.
Yeah, it is easy
anyone,
to read. Like it's definitely one of the easier ones.
Right, yeah.
I did
for anyone who does want to read it, we left off at line 52, was it?
Yeah, and I'll paste that in.
So,
and also, did I put a?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I put a PDF, but I will put the PDF that I use.
I think you did.
I'll
Maybe.
double check momentarily, but that way, if anybody wants to join in, if anybody sees this on YouTube, from wherever I platform the video or advertise
Yeah, you did. You did.
and you want to, oh sweet, good, and you want to join in, just send me a message on Instagram, Twitter, Telegram. My username on all of those platforms is Rogue Theologue, just like it is on YouTube. You could message me or comment, and I will give you the link to the server to join in. It is a server inspired by Arvol's Pure Academy for basically a focus on project collaboration for monistic idealists and for dialectical engagement of ideas. Thank you guys for coming in to read with me.